My name is Tony Gale and I have a confession to make. For almost 20 years I've been installing skateboard bearings incorrectly. Now that sounds overly dramatic, but there is a right and a wrong way to install a skateboard bearing. As most people know, the absolute worst thing you can do is to take a brand new skateboard bearing, a brand new wheel, and put it into the wheel like that and push it in with your thumb. That is god awful because it completely mangles the bearing. This is a precise and hopefully well engineered mechanical tool effectively. And if you put that stress on there, you'll damage it. So the solution that most people use, and what I did for many years, is to take a skateboard, take the axle nut off, put your bearing onto the axle, take your wheel and push. Now I've been doing that for years and that is fine. It's suboptimal, but it's fine. However, it's only fine because I use cord wheels. A cord wheel means that the bearing slips in nice and easy. Now for the last couple of years, I've been running a website called Offset Skate Supply. And I've been building and selling completes. And what I found very quickly is that when you have a wheel that isn't cord, trying to push a bearing in is really difficult. Now I'm sure most of you have done this before. You've put your bearing onto the axle, you've put the wheel on and you've gone, God, that isn't going on easy. Oh, that's a bit of a struggle. And you've had to fight. And the problem with that is that this is an imperfect surface to push against. And you end up pushing the outer ring away from the inner ring. The forces aren't even. So even though this is better than using your thumb, it can still damage the bearing. And that's when a friend of mine mentioned a bearing press. I'd never used one before. It took me some time to figure out how to use it. So this video today, I'm going to explain to you what a bearing press is, how to use it, and why you should use it. So here we have a bearing press. As you can see, this one is made by Shore Grip. I've covered some of their trucks in the past, the Invaders. Other brands are available, but they all basically follow the same layout as far as I can tell. It's just, having never used one, I learned with this. Now we're going to pull that lever up and then pull this section up as well. This is effectively our replacement axle. This is what we're going to build the wheel around, and this is why it's better than using the axle. When you push a bearing onto the axle, all you're really doing is contacting the inner ring, this section. Now, that's better than using your thumbs because you're not pushing the shield in. If the shield gets pushed in, then it contacts the ball bearings, the bearing slows down. But this has a large flange. So when you put the bearing on there, you're not just pushing on the inner ring, you're pushing on the outer one at the same time. You're pushing it in unison. The same thing happens at the other end of the bearing press. This also has a flange, so that when the bearing at that end is there, that is also getting pushed in evenly. So we've put our bearing on there, and we take our wheel, in this case a seismic focus, and we put that face up. The next step is your bearing spacer. Now these are always important because they keep your bearings in line, but in this case it's even more important because we're going to be pushing from both sides at once. That spacer is going to stop our bearings being crushed together, crushed out of line. Now, we slid the spacer on there, so now we put our next bearing on, and we close this whole contraption. Now, everything right now is a little bit loose, so you have to make sure that as things start sliding together, it's meeting the bearing seats on both sides. With cord wheels, this isn't a problem, but with uncord wheels, you might have to just double check at the back. But now, we just start closing it up. We push that lever in, and it's done. No stress, no strength, and most importantly, no twisting. Everything has gone in completely straight as it's supposed to. So now, we've done that one, let's try it with an uncord wheel. As I mentioned earlier, these are always more of a struggle to get the bearings in. Tolerances are not quite as fine. They're not quite as well engineered as a cord wheel. So trying to get a bearing in these can be hard work. But we do exactly the same. We put a bearing on, put that on face up, put a spacer in, and then another bearing. We close this up, Like I said, we're just going to make sure that back bearing in particular seats nicely. Once we're happy that everything's in line, we push this down. Oh, there's a bit of a fight, but there you go, you're in. Nice and easy. Pull that out. Everything's gone in perfectly straight. That wheel is now ready to use. And most importantly, we've not damaged the bearings doing it. If you're only changing your wheels every 3 to 6 months, you might not see a use for this. However, if you're building a lot of boards like I am, it's pretty important. If you want to change your bearings, if you want to take them out, clean them, strip clean them, re-lubricate them, which you should, especially if you're using good bearings, this has a secondary use. Because it's not just for pushing the bearings together, it's also for taking the bearings out. So we're going to close that up and look at the other end. There's a little hook here, just that little nub. That is a bearing puller. And that is honestly the best part of this whole arrangement. Now, if you've ever taken a bearing out of a wheel before, and you've used a skateboard to do so, what you've probably done is put your wheel onto the axle like that, slotted it on just so it's just in that bearing and not touching the spacer, and then you've twisted like that. And it levers the bearing out, which is fine, apart from the fact that in that twisting motion, you're pulling those two rings out of line. That's a really good way of damaging a bearing. It might not matter if you only do it once, but it's not something you want to do regularly. And if you're planning on servicing your bearings, you definitely don't want to do that. So this is where that hook comes in. We take the wheel and we slot it in like that. Now, obviously I've just taken the back bearing out of this, but it means that you can see kind of roughly what's going on, hopefully. I've put that hook in there, and in doing so, that hook pushes this spacer up and out of the way, off center. And the hook grips onto the back of the bearing. So we're just snugged in there, and I'm going to start pulling this back as if we're putting another wheel together at this end. And all it does is pull that bearing and that wheel against the end of the press. And easy as that. No force needed, everything comes out straight, there's no twisting on the bearing. It's even easier with a cord wheel because there's so much less pressure needed. You put that in there, making sure you can actually find the spacer. Sometimes that's a bit difficult. Again, we push the spacer slightly out of the way and just pull in. Speeds up the whole process. Doesn't damage the bearing. I love this thing. So easy. Now, I actually got this in to sell to my friend, Simon Rosinski, and he isn't having it. I love this thing. Over the last month or so, this has made my life so much easier. I am converted. Now, if you are just running cheap wheels, cheap bearings, and you run them to death, you never bother changing them, maybe you don't need one of these. If you care about your gear, you're running some high quality stuff, you know, some decent bearings, and you are servicing them regularly, invest in one of these. It will make such a difference to your life, I promise you. But for now, go away. I'm going to finish building up my new board and yeah, go do something more interesting. You don't want to watch me do that. Seriously, go away.